All right. Good afternoon. For those of you who are tuning in today, welcome to a new edition of the National Reentry Network for Returning Citizens, Black Table Talk. We have none other in the studio today, Mr. Anthony DiGiovanni himself, and I'm your host, Mr. Sellers. And we're going to kick it off with Mr. DiGiovanni introducing himself to the audience.
Hello, folks. It's Anthony DiGiovanni here. It's good to meet everybody. Hope that y'all will be able to get a lot from this show.
Awesome. So we're going to dive right into it. I just want to say, that we're in for a really exciting conversation. Everything from your reentry journey, right? Everything prior to being in the system, coming out, the barriers that you've had to overcome, and how life has been treating you so well in present day. So for those of us who may not know you personally or who may not know your backstory, can you just give us a little bit about, who was Mr. DiGiovanni prior to your entry into the legal system?
Anthony DiGiovanni was a self-employed tile setter.
Self-employed tile setter? What is that?
I was a tile mechanic. I did bathroom tile, kitchen tile, foyers.
I did not know that.
Wherever you put tile, and I was self-employed, was doing well in business, but I came from a middle-class dysfunctional family. I had a lot of trauma and issues, eventually got involved in using drugs, became a pretty serious addict, and my life went downhill and everything went down the drain with it. My business, the place that I lived, my relationship, I lost everything, including my freedom, in 30 years and 3 months of my life to incarceration.
I would have never known that you were doing that type of work or, had that experience. Are you a native to Washington, D.C.?
I was born in the district. I was raised in Maryland.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. That's how we loop in. That's what we call now the DMV.
Yes.
Yes. So yeah, I heard what you just said, and I thank you for, being vulnerable and taking up some space and sharing that, you know what I mean? Substance use is a real thing, right? And, it's wonderful that you can talk about it and not feel, othered, right? Feel more of an advocate and empowered by telling your story. Hopefully someone who can hear this can relate and, maybe, make a change in their personal life story too. So, as you just stated, that was your, that was your Achilles heel, so to speak, substance use. And that kind of, like you were about to say, probably pulled you into the legal system. So how did that, journey start, and where did you begin to realize that my life had started to take a turn in the wrong direction?
I realized that my life was taking a turn in the wrong direction before I got to prison. But the journey in drug use is not an easy one to get out of. You can want to get out, but parts of you don't.
Okay.
And the parts of you that don't are going to take you on a wild ride. But everybody's journey is a little bit different. Mine ended up being that I wanted it so bad at some points that I was willing to do just about anything to continue to be able to get high. I went on a 3-day crime spree in 1990. And I committed 3 robberies, one of which a guy tried to pull a weapon on me, and he wound up in a position that I don't ever want to put anybody in again. Because there are a lot of things that you can take and replace in life, but you cannot replace a life that you take.
Yeah. I thank you for bringing context to that, because sometimes we hear, like you said, the term substance use, and we don't know how far down that rabbit hole it can take a person, right? Because I think the term is it really is a vice, right? You can consider it, one of those that sin that just never stops giving, right? And like trying to paint that picture any other way, it doesn't really bring context to what someone is really going through and struggling with.
Right. Everyone's journey on recovering from substance abuse or substance use is their own, but it comes down to a decision. Have I had enough? What do I want in my life? Do I want this or do I want something better? And most people want something better, but having the tools and the desire and the strength that they don't know is within themselves, they start looking outside of themselves for the miracles and the help. And it starts within. You have to seek your own strength. You have to seek your own power and your own ability, and then go out there and get the tools with which you need to do the work. Get with the people. Start changing who you hang out with, where you go. Start finding other vices that are safe. Get a PlayStation. Get an Xbox. Do something. Drugs ain't worth it.
Say no to drugs. I hear you, Mr. D. I hear you, Mr. DiGiovanni. It's funny because, like, what we're talking about now, you know, that day, probably like when you stood in front of that judge and he pronounced that sentence, right? You said you did a 33-bit.
I did a 30-year and 3-year bit, or I'm 30 years and 3 months with 3 different sentences.
Wow.
From a 3-day crime spree.
So thank you for explaining that. And so when that judge gave you your sentence and now you're in the system, just for our listeners who may not know, right? Like, you were in a vulnerable situation, and the system as we know it being a punitive system, you know, they laid down the hammer on you for what you just said that your reality was, right? Something that you were, you know, going through. Sometimes we as community members don't see or lose sight on the reality of a person saying, you know, it's a cry for help, right? But we know that in our system, it's a punitive way that we go about what we like to call rectifying a situation between a person in our community or another individual in our community, right? So, like you said, the judge gives you the sentence. You come to terms with that, right? You being vulnerable to what you did, but at the same time, the help that you didn't receive but prior to. Substance use, so on and so forth, that could have maybe, if that was available, led to a different outcome. Now that you're in that headspace, right, and facing that reality, tell our listeners what being behind bars and being in the system, you know, how did it impact you? How did it affect you?
Getting behind bars, the first few years was just trying to adjust to not having freedom, trying to adjust to a sentence that I would have been a very old man had I done all of it. It's not easy. It was a major wake-up call to say, hey, is this what you want? I mean, to turn around your life and then still be faced with the amount of time and knowing that there is a chance to go home at a certain time and looking forward to it, working hard, working your butt off, and then having everybody and their brother, especially the United States Parole Commission, turn around and say, hey, we don't believe that you're going to abide by the rules. Should we release you? That's another wake-up call, that you still have to face it. You still have to get up. You still have to do what's right, regardless of all the hits. Everybody knocks you down, get your butt back up. Forget laying down. Oh, I mean, okay, you get knocked down, stay down for a few, get your breath, get your strength back. You know, get your mind right, get up, and keep moving. If you got to crawl, crawl. Whatever way gets you where you trying to go, get there. If you got to crawl, if you got to slither, get up on your hands and knees before you can finally stand up on your own feet. But whatever way, you got to do it. You got to face it if you want to get free, if you want to get to where you're going. It's all about setting yourself goals that you can accomplish and working toward them.
Absolutely. When you said all of that, right, particularly the part about community, and when I'm saying community, I'm specific to the reentry and justice impacted individuals going through the system, right? There is a community within that. And you highlighted the United States Parole Board and what they think of your character. And what you just said as far as crawl before you walk, you know, the emotional intelligence that's necessary in a situation that you had, you know, yet you were faced with, given the legal system that you went through and how our system is set up. My only thought and my question is, if we have, like you said, the emotional intelligence to program ourselves to recognize, and I was going to say, if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, you have to go in community. And the fact that you tied in the parole board and what they thought of you and your character and how they were either going to free you or think other, like you said, he's going to get out and still whatever, fill in the blank, XYZ. Can we trust that he's going to have the character, the emotional intelligence, right, to redefine what society might think of a justice impacted individual? So can you tell our listeners, once you had, that realization that you were in community, right? You were working with people who were against you, you know what I mean? In terms of how they saw your character, what is it that you did in spite of all the hell that you were going through to get through that point and say, you know what, I can do this?
I knew I could do it from the get-go. I knew I could do it before I got that decision. I just got held back, but it didn't matter. I was going to come home at some point, and I was going to come home with the help that I needed. I was going to come home with the strength within myself, which was the most important, and then seeking the people that can get me to where I need to go. And I had a lot of help. I had people that were able to get me started with the resources that I needed to get on my feet. And that's important for us as a returning citizen, is to have that security of a home, to have that, hey, man, I got your back. That is absolutely important for us, to have somebody saying, man, I got your back. Even if they don't say the words, they got your back, they got your back. You got a house, you got your food. It's important that we have the resources we need to get what we need. We don't come out with the intentions to recidivate. Most of us don't.
No, we don't. Yeah, that's right.
We intend to keep moving forward. When I got let out, despite the parole commission, the judge let me out. And every day that I've been home for these past 4 years, now getting ready to go on my 5th year,
Welcome home. That's right.
I get to say, hey, what was your opinion? And what's your opinion? What was your opinion then, as I can remember, in writing what y'all stated as your reasons for declining my approval for parole multiple times over? What's your opinion now? I'm home. CSOSA has given me a glowing report that I've been in full compliance from day one. They're about to release me from my probation a year early. And, of course, my own parole. What's everybody else's excuse? We have psychologists and we have everybody else in U.S. programs. We're trained to be subjective. Yeah, that's a bad way to be thinking about things, because you can like somebody subjectively and let them out and they go kill somebody the next day.
And that's subjective. Yeah.
And that is a real way of just messing things up. But that was their statement to me directly. And that's their attitude. And we need to readjust all of this.
Yeah, I'm not going to rush past that, because that's a point. So you finally got called to your hearing, right? Or stood in front of the judge a second time to consider to release you on parole.
To release me on compassionate release.
Compassion. And how did you, just so we can get the context for those who are listening and who may not be familiar with this process, how did you even get chosen for a compassionate release?
It was quite a surprise because 2 of the blocks for compassionate release were violent crime, which I committed, and sex offenses. Thank you for making a minute for that one.
Okay.
Took me a moment to recall that.
Mm-hmm.
But being a sex offender and a violent offender were 2 reasons not to be able to get release on COVID.
So that means they were going to step you back, and they were saying those are the reasons why we're going to step you back.
That was one of the things they could have looked at and said no to being released for compassionate release for
Okay.
COVID. But my crime was, after it was considered and looked at by the judge, I was given a sentence much more severe than what the crime actually was, considering the original details of the case. Not to mention that he decided in my favor because my crime was more than 30 years old. And during my incarceration, I had no violent offenses. And that is a major impact, because if people think that, oh, he's incarcerated, he can't do nothing, there are killings going on in the penitentiaries every day, if not every week. There's somebody dying. Not even, it's not just the penitentiaries, even the mediums. There are violent offenses occurring in the low securities. There are violent offenses occurring, period. If a person wants to be what they want to be, they're going to be that person. If a person wants to be a better person, then they're going to be a better person. If they want to commit crime, they're going to still commit crime in a prison. So all of those things are considered. And in the light of that, my judge, despite the fact that the prosecutor tried to make some false claims to keep me in,
Right, of course.
I still won my release with a diligent and great public defender.
And the reason why I had you bring that context is because you got straight to the point. The judge himself, and you said it, right, said that the system is flawed. What you were sentenced, the punishment that they tried to lay on you, the exaggeration, the hyperbole around that determination, based on the judge that you stood before for your compassionate release, said that this does not add up. It's not appropriate. This is not the correct legal due process that you would actually go through in a position that you were in, Mr. DiGiovanni, given the reason why you were standing in front of the court in the first place. And the fact that he said that, to me, it just, and I'm sure those who are listening said, you know what, that's the part of our system that no one wants to talk about and hear, that a mistake was made, and that they were going to, if you didn't have that hearing right before this judge, let you finish that time. And you said it a minute ago, you would have been a lot older, a lot more of your life. Can you imagine that? So I thank you for pausing and telling that part of your compassionate release story, because there's probably another person who's going to experience something very similar. And the fact that that person stood up, and the other person you said who was being subjective and tried to smear, run a smear campaign on your character. Well, he just gonna go out, right, and recidivate. You know what I mean? They were basically asking, like, what's gonna stop you from committing another crime? And can you just imagine how the system continues to allow that type of practice to happen when we're talking about a human being?
Yeah. And that's something that I've been trying to be very active and vocal for at City Hall, to make changes within the Parole Commission. We don't want to really linger on this subject a whole lot, but there's a lot of changes that need to be made for returning citizens still, and we're all working towards that. I'm grateful and glad to be a part of the National Reentry Network for this. I'm glad that I got to go through the classes, because they gave me a lot of understanding more about myself, financial needs, financial education, which have taken me quite a ways forward in my journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I wanted to talk about that. It's funny you say that, because just to think about where your life is at now, right? You're home, you about to get, you about to come off of parole early, right? Because it's the same thing that has been lingering in your storytelling since you started this conversation with us today. Your character is what counts. How you're telling that story, Mr. DiGiovanni, how you showed up today and spoke to